Hey YouTubers, this is the Gold Standard 00924 coming at you with another video for you guys today. So this is basically going to be my review of WWE Summerslam 2018. Now I do realize that this pay-per-view is come and gone, and I just didn't really have the time earlier this past week to conduct an in-depth review concerning about my thoughts about this pay-per-view. Now, the match that started off was for the Intercontinental Championship, so this is basically a grudge match from the July pay-per-view Extreme Rules. So we have Dolph Ziggler going in as the IC champion, defending the belt against Seth Rollins. Now, going into this, I was pretty nervous about how this match would turn out, because from the previous pay-per-view they had Extreme Rules. It was a half-hour Iron Man match, which surprisingly was the headline of that show for the first time in many years. And even despite a good performance between Seth and Dolph, I mean, the crowd reaction just really destroyed the my appreciation of the match, and just basically putting themselves over, just doing that Royal Rumble countdown every time. And it just got very stale, and it just shows just how disrespectful the crowd was with Seth and Dolph. We do, however, get a rematch here, which is really strange since there was no like gimmick match being involved. It's just like a traditional one-on-one match. And the match was surprisingly a lot better than it turned out. So I was worried about how the crowd reaction would be, but it turned out to be a lot better than the previous encounter that they had at Extreme Rules. And Seth Rollins would regain the Intercontinental title from Dolph Ziggler. So Dean Ambrose had just made his return on the Go Home Raw to SummerSlam, siding with his Shield buddy Seth Rollins, fighting fire against fire with Dolph Ziggler's bodyguard and Drew McIntyre. I definitely really loved this match. I thought it was a lot better than the previous encounter that they had. It was just a really great moment. I think a notable spot I really liked was when Seth Rollins did that reverse suplex off the top rope and then hits like a Falcon Arrow. So that was actually my favorite, probably one of my most favorite or most notable moments of that match I could remember. Rollins did, however, came out of the match as the new Intercontinental Champion, so definitely really proud for him and just very proud for this match and what it turned out to be. Now, I do kind of wish Drew McIntyre kind of stepped outside of Dolph Ziggler's shadow and really branch out into his own singles run. I mean, especially given his run in NXT and even his brief run in TNA. But I don't know why they're just kind of putting him in this role, especially since he'd been a NXT champion and such. So I don't know why they just had him go from that to just being a lackey for Dolph Ziggler. I definitely really enjoyed that match. Now we get to the Smackdown Tag Team titles. So we have the Bludgeon Brothers defending the belt against the New Day. Now this was actually a match that I was surprisingly impressed by. Big E just tearing down Harper and Rowan, and Xavier Woods doing like this massive elbow drop from the top, and just the crowd had this standing ovation that Xavier was receiving. So that was actually some really cool stuff. The match ended in disqualification. I'm actually really impressed with what Harper and Rowan have been. I was pretty iffy on the gimmick at first, especially how cartoony it was when they first debuted. But they're actually winning me over here and really trying to make the most out of this particular iteration of their partnership, I guess you could say. And it's so interesting just to see that at one point in time, Harper and Rowan were part of the Wyatt family with Bray Wyatt, and it's just even more ironic that now you fast forward like 5 years after they debuted, now like Harper, Rowan, and even Braun Strowman being the Money in the Bank holder is making more success than their leader, which is very ironic. Although Bray Wyatt did, however, held the tag team titles earlier this year with Matt Hardy. But even at the end of the day, it just really feels that the Bludgeon Brothers and Braun Strowman pretty much got more out of their career outside of being Bray Wyatt's buddies and what have you. Definitely really impressed with what they're doing with the Bludgeon Brothers and the New Day just being the New Day, as you know, being awesome as usual, being the most over tag team of the past decade or so. I'm surprised they've been around as long as they have been. I thought they were just going to be a tag team that were going to be around for like maybe a few years, maybe like 2 or 3 years at top. They're almost close to that 5 year mark, so it'll be interesting just to see how long that they'll be together as a team, potentially just to see who may be the breakout star of the three. It's definitely going to be interesting where they'll be in a year or two by the time we get to WrestleMania 35. Nevertheless, I definitely really enjoyed this match. Now, I do realize that on the Smackdown after SummerSlam that they did a rematch and the New Day actually won the tag team titles. So really glad to see that happen. I definitely really enjoyed this match, and I think their match on SmackDown was a lot better compared to what we have here. But I mean, not the saying that this match wasn't great or anything, but I mean, the match did its job, and it definitely was very enjoyable from start to finish. So I definitely really enjoyed this match. Then we have is the rematch from Extreme Rules. So this was Braun Strowman defending his Money in the Bank briefcase, taking on Kevin Owens. Now, much like Seth and Dolph, so the previous pay-per-view they had a gimmick match, and then the next pay-per-view they basically made them into a traditional one-on-one match. So that was just kind of a weird way of approaching a grudge match or so. Yeah, surprisingly, this match was basically a squash, and Braun has been tormenting Kevin Owens for the past month or two, and there was like a cage match that they had at Extreme Rules where Braun Strowman shoved Kevin Owens off the steel cage fence onto the announce table just to kind of pay subtle homage to the Mankind Mick Foley table spot that occurred coincidentally in the same venue that King of the Ring 98 was held. So they basically do a rematch here, and it just kind of really feels like a very one-sided feud the more I think about it, especially since Kevin Owens kind of looked as this coward and Braun just being kind of like this big bad monster that's just going after his said targeted opponent. I mean, Braun's still very over as he is, and Owens is kind of really stale. He's just not the Kevin Owens that he was back when he was in NXT, and it's just very hard just to really take him seriously as a intimidating wrestler and what have you. I mean, this match did not last very long. Braun just completely obliterated Kevin Owens with that running power slam in order to get the victory. When I was watching the moment that Braun won the match, I had a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was gonna make an attempt to cash it in and going on to win the Universal title. But I'll get a little more into the Universal title match just in a moment. But yeah, I was surprised that this match was as short as it was, and it basically was over before it began. But nevertheless, it did its job. Strowman just completely decimates Kevin Owens. And then we get to the triple threat match on SmackDown, and it involves the Women's Championship. So Carmella going in as champion, defending the belt against Charlotte and Becky. Now, this is actually a pretty fun match, I will admit. Now, Carmella's title run really hasn't been anything special. It just kind of feels very, a typical heel run with Carmella being like this mean-spirited blonde, caring about herself. Now, Becky Lynch surprisingly has been back on top after a year and a half. And it's very interesting just to see how much that she's been trying to redeem herself from the momentum that she lost from the first few months since they reinstated the brand extension. So Becky Lynch being the first SmackDown Women's Champion. So then after a while, she just kind of floundered in the division for a bit, didn't really have a whole lot of direction. But then, Charlotte, given how she came into 2018 as the SmackDown Women's Champion, and even going as far as ending Asuka's undefeated streak. And then a little after that, Carmella, who had been holding that Money in the Bank briefcase for over a year, cashes in and beats Charlotte to become the SmackDown Women's Champion. So she's been holding that belt from that point onwards, heading into this event. And then after 2 opportunities, Charlotte came up short, and then she had to take time off. All that's going on. Becky Lynch is just working up the ladder. She's defeating every wrestler in her division, and finally gets this moment to challenge Carmella for what at the time would have been a one-on-one match. But then the instant that it was announced that Charlotte Flair was going to be ready to come back, So basically, they had a opportunity to challenge Carmella in a non-title match, which Charlotte did end up winning to earn her a spot in the triple threat match. So originally this was going to be a one-on-one match, but then eventually it just became a triple threat. And I actually definitely really enjoyed this match, but a lot of breakups here and there, so it just really kind of shows you just how fast-paced of a match that it was. Carmella was, kind of the third wheel in this, unfortunately. Charlotte and Becky, basically that was kind of like the center focus of this match, and there was already teasing of jealousy between Becky and Charlotte. The match ended when Charlotte managed to hit the natural selection and basically pinning Becky to become the SmackDown Women's Champion. After the match, this is probably the part where I just kind of lost it and just kind of had to scratch my head. It's like, why did they do this? It's like, what are you trying to accomplish out of this? So Charlotte and Becky, basically what looked like they were shaking hands, showcasing some signs of sportsmanship, and they have like a little hug, and basically taking a page out of what we saw with AJ Styles and Shinsuke Nakamura at WrestleMania 34. So they basically embrace, and then Becky does the unthinkable and ambushes Charlotte Flair from behind. Crowd pops. It's like they were already anticipating for this to happen, and they were cheering for Becky through and through. Charlotte was getting booed, and so this kind of led to this beatdown with Becky on Charlotte. Yeah, it's just very hard just to kind of think, Becky just supposedly being looked as the villain, the bad person that did something wrong, and it's just, I just don't understand why they did this. And honestly, Becky had to work her way up the ranks for about a year and a half. I mean, after she lost the women's title, she just didn't have a direction to go. So then, she had to work her way up the ladder. Charlotte was basically gone. So their it girl of the women's division on SmackDown had to be put to the side. So Becky had to kind of like step up to be kind of like that next big heroine to potentially be the top woman of the women's division, especially on SmackDown. And then Charlotte just comes back and steals her spotlight. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense because, Charlotte had like two opportunities and she came up short fair and square. And then normally, if that's the case, then Charlotte should have just been down the ladder. I just hate to bash on Charlotte. I mean, she's a unique wrestler of her own. I think it's also going to potentially hurt Charlotte's reputation, and fans just starting to turn on Charlotte like they've been with Roman Reigns and even maybe John Cena. I mean, she's basically kind of channeling that inner Roman Reigns, that inner John Cena of the women's division. It's just very hard to get behind someone that's just been handed things on a silver platter, and then as opposed to like the blue collar worker that had to bust their asses off to earn themselves a living, just being portrayed as the bad guy. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, we're supposed to take Charlotte seriously as this sympathetic babyface that didn't do anything wrong, even though there have been occasions where she backstabs on her best friends and even backstabbed her father at one point. I don't even remember if she ever apologized storyline wise for that. I mean, look back at some of the stuff she did to me. 2016, when she was the Raw Women's Champion, and it's just, oh my god, it's hard to get behind Charlotte. There's hardly any real obstacles that are in her way that we really need to like support her. And I don't get that with Charlotte the way I do with Becky. Nevertheless, I mean, I know that Becky, as far as her heel turn, I mean, basically the WWE did acknowledge this when they had to conduct a survey whether or not whether or not Becky's actions were justified. It turns out that the higher percentage is actually that her actions were justified. And I just have no idea what they're doing with Becky. I think she can be a good heel, don't get me wrong, but in terms of the situation, in terms of the context of the direction that Becky's in, it's just very hard to boo her for what she did. And and I honestly think that if they maybe do a double turn, perhaps, but I'm not getting my hopes up on that to happen. I mean, they really want to show that, that Charlotte's going to be like that go-to it girl for their division. I mean, they've been already marketed her as such ever since they started this campaign of the women's revolution, that she was kind of like their it girl. It's just very hard to get behind um, a heel Becky, and especially trying to sympathize Charlotte and feel sorry, even despite all the times that she's been given opportunities right out the ass. Charlotte did walk out of the match as the SmackDown Women's Champion, and it seems like they're going to set up a program with Charlotte and Becky for the next pay per view. Then we have it is AJ Styles going as champion taking on Samoa Joe. Now, this was a match that is sort of a TNA tribute match, and it's hard to believe that 10 years ago I wouldn't have expected a match like this to be in the WWE, especially having two of the biggest superstars from the South going over the competition and being presented in a big time match. This match is a prime example just to see how far these two have come and gone. I mean, these two have wrestled all over the independent scene, all over Japan, and we finally get this moment. It was actually a pretty good match. It was definitely given plenty of time. Samoa Joe just basically having the most offense in this match, just really wearing down AJ Styles, and eventually it picks up partway through. Also, AJ's family was in attendance in the crowd, so to speak. So you had his wife and his daughter watching in the front row, and Samoa Joe would just be on the mic, just talking trash about them, and just how he would be the daddy, especially since AJ Styles is not going to be around to take care of them. Basically, the match ended where AJ Styles just goes on a rampage and just assaults some of the staff members that were at ringside, and even uses a steel chair to take out Samoa Joe. So I thought for sure going into this that Samoa Joe was going to beat AJ Styles cleanly and become the WWE Champion, because AJ's been holding that belt ever since November when he won it from Jinder Mahal. He's been defending that belt the longest, and he defended against Shinsuke Nakamura. He's also defended the belt against Rusev. And now that we finally got someone like Samoa Joe, really giving AJ Styles kind of like that next big obstacle, the guy that could potentially be the one to dethrone AJ Styles and potentially win the WWE title from him. So I'm definitely looking forward to see where this feud plays out, especially since Hell in a Cell is next month. So it's likely that they'll probably make this a Hell in a Cell match. I definitely really enjoyed the match. Maybe not the greatest encounter that they've had compared to some of the stuff they did in TNA, but I definitely really enjoyed this match. Definitely looking forward to see where it goes. Then we get is Daniel Bryan taking on The Miz. Now, this feud basically 8 years in the making, and it's just hard to believe, especially since going back to the very beginning of the decade, how Bryan Danielson, as he was known in the independent scene, basically his real name, mind you, but he would eventually sign a contract with WWE in 2009, and then as soon as he makes that transition from the independent scene over to the WWE, so then they introduced us a little show at the time, that being NXT, which started off as this reality competition show. We get to 2010, so Daniel Bryan gets put into NXT, which at the time started off as a reality competition show, and then eventually evolved into the in-ring wrestling show that you see nowadays. So The Miz has been basically coaching Daniel Bryan on NXT. So The Miz has been kind of like the sports entertainer the antithesis to Brian, who's like this internet wrestling darling, and he just can't understand why people are so fascinated by Brian and what makes him stand out from the rest of the bunch on the main roster. I mean, if you look at the climate from back in 2010 and compare it to 2018, it just feels so different compared to what we have. Because even then, you kind of focus more on some of the homegrown talent that WWE was trying to make with, some of the NXT wrestlers, especially with the formation of the Nexus around this time. And then you have a guy like, Bryan Danielson, or Daniel Bryan as he was referred to, and being brought in as kind of like this fresh new wrestler trying to make a name for himself, even despite the fact that he had already made a name for himself prior to coming to WWE. So that was kind of a recurring theme that was brought up when Bryan Danielson or Daniel Bryan was first brought into the company. And The Miz just can't stand it. And Miz being the sports entertainer, Daniel Bryan kind of being that the traditional professional wrestler, so going through that mindset of pro wrestling versus sports entertainment. So that's kind of the theme between these two wrestlers. And this would go on for several years. Bryan did beat The Miz, became the United States champion, and they even spent the first a couple years before this, back around the time when Daniel Bryan retired. So Bryan would be the Smackdown general manager. The Miz would also be going back to, I guess you could say going back to Smackdown once they started the brand extension, once they started to reinstate the brand extension once again. We also had like this little show that they had called Talking Smack, and this was like a post show after SmackDown was off the air. And basically The Miz and Bryan, anytime that they would see eye to eye, so this would kind of lead to some back and forth trash talk, especially with The Miz kind of being like this self-absorbed superstar. We get to 2018. So by the time that rolled around, Daniel Bryan is back from retirement. He starts wrestling again. And now we kind of get this big moment where Bryan and Miz, after years and years of all this trash talk, all culminates into this one-on-one match here at SummerSlam. I definitely really enjoyed this match as well. And Maurice was also sitting in the front row as well, so she was involved in this match. So there was just a lot of good competition between the two. It ended where Maurice gave The Miz a brass knuckles and basically using that to knock out Daniel Bryan, but the referee didn't see it. So utilizing that advantage, Miz went over to the pin, gets the 3 count for him to defeat Daniel Bryan in this match. Daniel Bryan's contract is somewhere at the point where he's unwilling to renegotiate with WWE. So that's also been a common topic in the dirt sheets leading in this pay-per-view. It's just the uncertainty of Daniel Bryan's future, since he's only has a few months left before he whether or not he'll re-sign with the WWE or he's going to leave WWE to pursue other interests in other wrestling promotions. I'm thinking after what I saw with the segment between Daniel Bryan and Brie Bella that they may potentially do a mixed tag team match with them taking on Miz and Maurice. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. I think I read up online that this was a match announced for Hell in a Cell, but I could be wrong. So there could be a potential tag team match if it hasn't been announced already. Yeah, so I definitely really enjoyed this match. Then we get to another squash match, and this was Finn Balor taking on Baron Corbin. Now Baron's been a authority key figure on Monday Night Raw, and Finn Balor's also been on Raw for quite a while, I believe since the start of the brand extension when they started bringing that back. It was also nice to see Balor come back with the Demon King getup that he had. Completely annihilated Baron Corbin like how Braun annihilated Kevin Owens. So I was surprised that this match was relatively short. And I think that was for the better. Finn Balor defeated Baron Corbin. What else to be said? And then we get to the United States Championship bout. Shinsuke Nakamura defending the belt against Jeff Hardy. Now, this is basically a rematch from Extreme Rules. And basically, Shinsuke squashes Jeff Hardy within seconds to become the U.S. champion. Randy Orton, who had been out of television for the past several months, makes his return on television, turns on Jeff Hardy, gives him a low blow. And I'm surprised, even despite that Orton's not even in this match. I mean, this is just a regular match. It wasn't a triple threat match for some reason. I honestly don't know why. So I don't know what they're doing, but just have Orton just come out there and just have him do nothing. Speaking of that, Shinsuke did, however, go over Jeff Hardy, retain the U.S. title. Orton came out there just staring at Jeff Hardy, looking like he's going to go in and attack him, but then he just decides to go back. So that was just kind of very weird. So like Orton was just going down the ramp onto ringside. Looks like he's going to get in the ring, and then decides just bails out, and then doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything. He just comes in or comes out and then goes backstage. That was just very weird. I don't know why they didn't do a triple threat match, but I mean, this match was solid. I mean, it wasn't my favorite match, but I mean, this match wasn't as bad as I thought it was. But I don't understand why they did a squash match at the previous pay-per-view. So Shinsuke did go over Jeff Hardy in this match. And then we have is Ronda Rousey taking on Alexa Bliss. This is for the Raw Women's Championship. Now, this match was basically over before it began. So Ronda Rousey annihilates Alexa Bliss. A pretty one-sided match, and became the new Raw Women's Champion. Now, they've been kind of building this for the past few months, and then Ronda Rousey getting suspended for a number of weeks as a result of assaulting Alexa Bliss. So then she gets reinstated from suspension, and so they have this match here. So it definitely did its job. I think a lot of people, including myself, expected this to happen. I mean, especially with Alexa Bliss and Ronda Rousey, if you compare the two, I mean, they're entirely different leagues. I mean, Ronda Rousey, given her background history as an MMA fighter, and Alexa, given her background as a wrestler, but even based on her physique, you knew for a shot that she wasn't going to even stand a chance against the more experienced athlete in Ronda Rousey. And she did just that. So she just basically annihilated Alexa, locks in that arm breaker, and walks out of that match being crowned the new Raw Women's Champion. There's a possible speculation that Ronda might face one of the Bellas. And the instant where I saw the Bella twins actually came out there to congratulate Ronda Rousey. So I was kind of concerned about what's going to happen especially with their confrontation that they had. I mean, I understand why they're doing this with the Bellas, being that they have their own reality show on E. So I guess they want to use Ronda Rousey to kind of bring the crossover appeal with the Bellas, a big celebrity name like Ronda Rousey, to challenge another big celebrity like the Bellas, and particularly being Nikki Bella. So I just hope that's not the case, but it looks like from that direction that it's highly likely that it will. If I would rather choose who would face Ronda at WWE Evolution, I'd definitely be Natalya. I mean, not only that these two are best friends, but, you know, with Natalya, I mean, she's also a gifted athlete. I think someone that could work around Ronda's wrestling style. I mean, I know she's really starting to adjust to her run as a professional wrestler, transitioning from mixed martial arts. You know, also speaking of Natalya, she also came out there with the jacket that her father Jim Neidhart was wearing, because, you know, Neidhart had unfortunately passed away earlier this week, or earlier this month, I should say. And I mean, it's very unfortunate. I mean, rest in peace, Jim Neidhart. But yeah, so it's definitely showed just how honorable that she is to her father. I thought it was pretty nice just to see Natalya just come out there and honor her father in some way. So, and also going out there to support her best friend. So it was definitely a pretty sweet moment, I should say. Ronda did go over Alexa and became the new Raw Women's Champion. We get to our main event, and this is for the Universal title. Roman Reigns taking on the champion Brock Lesnar. A rematch from WrestleMania, and I would say the rematch from the previous two WrestleManias with 31 and 34. And unless you want to count the house show, the Greatest Royal Rumble, where they had that steel cage match. And even despite the finish, where Roman speared Brock through the cage fence, but it was announced that Brock did, however, manage to land on the outside on the ground first. So they basically used that to prolong the feud with Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar. I just wasn't interested in it at all to begin with. Unless if it involved a cash in, which is probably like the only redeeming thing that could have happened. But we did have Braun Strowman also coming out there just as soon as Roman and Brock had finished their entrances. Braun, rather than just having to have him go up there and just cash in when his opponents are down, so Braun just goes out his way and just tells that he's going to defend his Money in the Bank briefcase or cash in his briefcase in an honorable fashion. Kind of like Rob Van Dam in 2006, like an actual sanctioned match. Braun was just standing at ringside the whole time, and then at some point we had spots where I believe it was either Roman or Brock did a suicide dive on Braun Strowman. And basically, those two wrestlers that were competing in the match did assault Braun along the way. Brock knocked out a cameraman as well. He gave Braun an F5 for a bit. Let's see. It was actually a pretty quick match. About as quick as Goldberg and Lesnar from WrestleMania 33. And Roman just doing everything that he had to take down Brock Lesnar. Basically, just trying to, Superman punch here and there, and then a spear there. There was a moment where Brock tried to use a steel chair on Roman, but in self-defense, Roman manages to outsmart Lesnar by spearing Lesnar, getting that 1-2-3 for him to become the new Universal Champion. Now, the match was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I think if it wasn't for Braun getting out there and getting involved in the match somehow, then I think that this match would have been a bust as much as their WrestleMania 34 match, which was basically a match that I think turned away a lot of fans, just how underwhelming it was. And I think having Braun, as far as his involvement in the match is concerned, really brought some eyes to the match, as opposed to just dazing off somewhere else, or just potentially having the fans in the crowd just walk out of the match as a protest to this main event that had already been announced, or at least had been, as far as the direction that they were going, it was pretty obvious that they were going to go with Roman and Brock, especially after what happened at the Greatest Royal Rumble. And this match was what it was. Roman did defeat Brock Lesnar. I'm not sure if it was even a no-holds-barred match, because I did remember Brock actually using steel steps, and I'm not sure if that would count as a DQ, but I think that's just a minor nitpick. I was one of those guys that was hoping for Braun to win it, to win the belt and cash it in. But at the same time, having Braun win the title by cashing it in would just be another one of those Roman got screwed storylines that has just been going on for about as long as I could remember. And just to have another one of those moments to actually happen, or to potentially happen, excuse me, it would just turn me off just watching the product, and just to see Roman Reigns never getting the title, even despite all the times that he's been having match after match after match, and somehow, some way, he's always getting screwed. I mean, it just would have been bad for the character, and I know people could say what they want about Roman, and they have every right to have that opinion. I'm very relieved now that Brock's no longer the champion. Now, as far as whether that he's still going to be in the company going forward, that has left to be seen. Yeah, so I think Roman has a lot of work to do to kind of getting to bring back the prestige of the title. Yeah, that's basically my thoughts on SummerSlam 2018. So leave down your comments in the comment section below. Tell me what your thoughts about this pay-per-view. Until then, this is the Gold Standard 0924 signing out.